And I've had a lot of successful trips, but I've had a lot of trips where I didn't fill tags and things went wrong. I always say that, hey, if I had a good plan and you execute your plan, but there's just factors that you can't control, that things don't go your way, that's part of it. Just be happy that you had a good plan and you executed it. The result is the result. You can't really control the result. Control your process, control your preparation, and then eventually, if you keep stacking up those trips, you're going to have success.
Welcome to the Just Hunt podcast.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Just Hunt podcast. This is episode 4, and today it's just me and Matt, and we are going to do a Q&A with some of the listener/viewer questions that we get. Side note before we get into it, if you have questions and we're asking for them, make sure you send them to our social media, Just Hunt Club, like Instagram, or comment on the YouTube channels. We got a bunch of questions from a bunch of different interesting avenues. We got them, but we want to make sure they go in the in one place. So we don't even have like who asked the question for a lot of these because of that. So tell us who you are. Ask the questions. We like to answer them. That's part of what we're doing this for, is to help people. So we want to answer and talk about stuff that's relevant to everybody watching, listening. So Matt, what do we got?
Just to start off, this is the first time we're doing this style, obviously. Let us know things we could do better. If you like it, we'll do more of them, obviously. And if you have a question that didn't get asked today that you want to have answered, drop it in the comment below. We'll be taking these periodically from past episodes to answer for future Q&As. Or you can also email us directly at justhuntklubbpod@gmail.com.
Maybe we can even just pick a really good one every episode and go through it quick or something like that, depending on. So keep them coming. We have a current event too.
Yes.
The big deer.
Yes.
There's actually 2 now.
Another one came up?
So yeah. I believe
because that one was from
Massachusetts
3 years ago.
Oh, it was?
That it got killed.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a 2022.
That was this year. Well, I guess I think it was, I don't know if it was a gross or not. I think it was a gross 215 non-typical archery kill in Massachusetts, and I think it just got officially scored. It's a new state record non-typical archery buck, and it's like freaking wild. It's a huge deer. I don't care where you're at. If you're in
it's got
Iowa,
it's got drop tines. It's got the whole thing. It's
super massive, just a giant like freak looking deer, and like
the last place you would think that it would come from.
Would be
New England. But
there's in general, but I mean that's definitely like the top end of deer for this area. They don't get much bigger than that. I think there's been maybe like.
So that was number 2 all time in Mass, right?
I think
that's what
I mean it's I know New Hampshire has 1 buck bigger than that, a 222. That's the state record, non-typical for all weapons.
When was that killed?
Oh God, like a long time ago. A long time ago. They found it in like an old barn, so who knows? I think it is from New Hampshire, but I always wonder some of those. It's been in a barn for 80 years, and so and so's grandfather shot it, and up on that mountain. It's like, but did he really? Well, I don't know. I'm not questioning legitimacy of it. I just wonder how they proved that. They probably did their work and their homework and investigation of it, if it's the state record, which it currently is. I think it's called the Gravali buck or the Graval buck or something like that. Anyways, there's that. I know there's some bigger ones in Maine for sure. Maine's got some in like their 240s, 250 ranges, because Maine has some really, really giant deer over the years.
Wild genetics.
Yeah, but I mean that's probably one of the top deer ever killed in New England or even the Northeast. I mean, even New York and some PA. I mean, it's tough. Once you get over 200 inches, you're kind of in a whole new class when it comes to Northeast deer. It's tough to get them bigger than that. Obviously, it's tough anywhere, but particularly in the Northeast. But also, there was a New Hampshire buck. I don't know how high he's going to go. He's a rifle kill, but he was killed
past season.
Yep, and he grossed 197, and I think he's either a typical 10 or 12, but I think he had like 27 inch spread on the inside. And like, I don't know, it's a giant deer. A lot of people knew about that deer. A couple guys we knew of hunted him. And I remember seeing that deer's picture like 4 years ago, a trail camera picture. And I was like, oh my God. And it seemed like, and it was like posting on social media and no one like made a big deal of him. Like that deer is giant. He wasn't as big then as he was now, but like he was like a 175 inch deer. And he's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. So
yeah, it's cool that somebody got the chance to put their hands on him.
Yeah, somebody finally killed him. So first, well, that was a few years back, but seems like there's like a 200-ish buck killed, every year somewhere in New England, I would say, or pretty close to it. So, but that's like pretty much as big as they get. But a 215 and a 197, pretty impressive. So that's cool. Those deer rival, deer anywhere really. So pretty neat. They can get big if they get old, and they have the genetics. I'm sure winters and like their food probably play into that too, because there's probably a fair amount of not a fair amount, but there's a bigger number of deer that have that genetic potential but never express it because they don't get old enough, or they just maybe they have a bad winter, they don't have the same food source, or they're stressed, whatever happens. So I feel like to grow that big of a rack in New England in the Northeast, everything has to go right.
Yeah.
Like everything has to go right. So pretty cool.
Yeah, it'd be one of those things. It's never going to happen, but it would be great to be able to study on a case by case basis and see
like what the actual
if it's
potential
just a complete,
is.
if it's a complete anomaly, or if there is some commonality there.
I mean, the genetic thing is a big deal. Like there's some deer that could be as old as they could live until they die of old age and have awesome nutrition, but they're never going to be over like 125 inches, maybe even 120 inches. But then I think there's some deer that are just genetically disposed to just be a giant. But still they need to get to probably, I think that deer was like, man, he must have been 8 or 9, something like that. I don't know. He was an old deer, because I remember like 4 years ago he was big.
4 years prior,
he was like a Boone and Crockett,
170,
class deer. So we had to have been say 7, 8, 9, whatever, maybe 10. But yeah, so they need that for sure. And it seems like in New England, for deer to get to that, like 160, 70, 80 or bigger, they need to be like 7 years old, 7, 8, 9. Like seems like that's when it takes them that long to get that big. We're in the Midwest, or even in Canada, these deer can get there, at 4 years old. So that's, I think, the biggest difference I see. And then, of course, like I said, everything has to go right. Maybe they have the mass crop in the area they're in. They have maybe they're fed over the winter. Maybe it's a mild winter, whatever. They find a pocket where their living's easy and they're able to express that and put energy and nutrients, I guess, into their antlers and not into their survival, which a lot of the deer in the Northeast have to go into survival mode. So pretty cool. It's I don't know how you find those deer. Like, it'd be awesome, but I just think it's just dumb luck if you find a deer that big, even a hunt or get a picture of one. I always that's my dream, to find like a 180 to hunt in New England, but I haven't found one yet. I don't know that I've even really got pictures of a 180, honestly.
What do you think is the highest scoring deer that you've had a picture of that you haven't been able to kill?
Honestly, probably 160s. I don't think I've really. I'm trying to think if there was one. No, I did have one in the 170s. It's actually the state record archery typical in New Hampshire. He was, I think, 170s typical. That would be the biggest one. I didn't shoot him.
Yeah.
Someone else did. But that was probably the biggest one. I did hunt an 8-pointer that was in the 160s, which is, pretty world class for an 8-pointer. But I'd say, that one typical. New Hampshire has 2 categories. It has a perfect typical and a typical category, which is like kind of, I don't know why we have those 2 categories. It is a state record of one of them, and I actually think it is like the smaller of the 2 top typicals. So I think it like gross 170 or something like that. Maybe that's in the high 160s. And then the other one I think is just a few inches bigger. So I think if it has any non-typical points at all, like even in 1-inch sticker, then it can't be in the perfect typical category. It has to be in just a typical category. But you obviously get deducted for it. So I don't really understand why we do that, but I think that we do. But yeah, it's hard. And I could obviously put a lot more effort into there's some guys that go far and wide and search for these giants. There's a couple guys that come to mind. I just don't have the time. I don't have the time to do it. And the other thing is a lot of the places that they live, I just have no desire to hunt. it's a lot of it's
starting to get into the suburban stuff.
Yeah. More or less.
Dealing
more
with deer that other people know about.
Yeah, and lots of posted land. And I just am not. I'd rather just hunt a big woods deer, I guess, around here that I can just go wherever I want, not worry about a bunch of other people, even if it's like a 140, 150, rather than. I mean, maybe if I found a 200 in suburbia, that would change my mind, but I haven't yet. So until that day comes, I will maintain that I'd rather hunt, in a big woods, low pressure, just be by myself scenario. So pretty cool.
Yeah. Anyways, we've been talking for 11 minutes already and haven't answered a single question.
All right.
So
what do we got?
All right. So I think
want to talk about why I'm wearing a hat?
The most answered question. I think some people scared or made Brett a little self-conscious. So
I have a hat on today.
Question number 1 was, does Brett shine his head?
Yeah. No, I don't. But we record this in the evening. It's at the end of the day. I haven't showered since the morning. Might be a little greasy. No shine though. I mean, no percival shine. So I have the hat, so I don't blind you all. But this is probably just for today though. I don't really like to wear hats inside. So that one's for you. Whoever asked that. Was there a couple people?
I don't know. There was at least one. We'll go with that.
At least one. Okay. What else we got?
A lot of big woods, northeast type questions, obviously. So we'll just get into those. When e-scouting in New Hampshire, what kind of criteria do you need in an area before you start putting boots on the ground?
So it can be, I'll speak to what I like to look for it, but this suits my personality and style, but this doesn't necessarily have to be what everybody looks for. There are some things I would definitely highly suggest, but they don't have to do it exactly like me. For me, I'm looking for elevation, and what that means is mountains for the most part, or high ground, as I call it, high country. I like to be up there. I just don't like to be low, like in the swamps. I will hunt down there, but that is another place you could go if you have a huge expansive swamp that's tough to access and tough to get into. A lot of people don't want to go in there. You could use water access, hip boots, whatever, and go really deep. But the common denominator between the two is you're basically getting way away from people, and you're getting to deer that are pretty much, well, for the most part, unpressured most of the season. Obviously, during gun season, there's people that kind of get everywhere. But for the majority of the year, those deer are left alone. And I think the older, bigger bucks prefer that. So that's the number one. I'm looking for an area that's the deer are left alone, and they can not encounter humans on a regular basis. So for me, that's the high country or the mountains. You don't have to get that high either. You just have to get up in there enough to get away from a lot of people. So that's what I look for. That's number one. Number two is for sure habitat types. So if you're down in the swamps, there you go. You have edge and habitat and browse in the swamps. By nature of a swamp, that's, they're very high in that. A lot of early succession growth, low growing, browse. As far as the high ground stuff, I'm looking for cuts, more or less. That's the big one. Not that I wouldn't ignore an area without cuts, but if I'm going to be in an area up high without cuts, there's probably going to be a pretty defined hardwood, softwood edge with some mass crop if I can. If I'm in, I guess, low enough elevations where there still is mainly oak. If you get too far north, northern Maine, northern New Hampshire, Vermont, northern Adirondacks, you start to lose that oak. I like to still be in a zone where there still is oak, but kind of like pushing the envelope as far as like elevation and how far north I am. So, those define lines between hardwood and softwoods is what I'm looking for. And if there's a big cut in there, and I'm not talking like, if there's a 1 acre cut, that's just not going to move the needle. It's not that much browse. I'm talking like significant acres that have been cut, like 100 acres or 50 acres or 500 acres. And it doesn't have to be a clear cut. It can be a select cut, but enough that there's abundance of browse. That's what those deer are going to be keyed on in the big woods, is the browse. That's why, in the Adirondacks where they don't cut much timber, there's huge expanses where there aren't many deer at all. And the deer that you do have in those areas are usually smaller body wise because they don't have the food. And that's why a lot of deer in Maine get very big and heavy. Obviously genetically they're a bigger deer, but also there's a lot of browse and timber logging operations in Maine, which creates an abundance of food. So that's what you want to look for. You want to get away from people, it's not only people, it's also like almost other deer. Like I think a lot of these deer like to hang out in these remote pockets where there isn't high deer densities. They want to be alone. So you want to find a place, like I said, where a big old mature buck can be alone. He cannot be disturbed. He has the food and the edge. That's what you're really looking for, is the edge habitat, right? It's not just these lines, but all it is edge. Whitetails relate to edges. And I guess the last one I'm looking for is some sort of topography. It doesn't necessarily have to be topography, but typically it is. Topography that defines movement and concentrates movement, because those are the areas that are easiest to hunt. You could have a area with the best habitat, but if there's nothing that defines movement, then those deer are just tough to kill. Like they're there, but I mean, the odds of killing them are much lower in a big wood setting. So get away from people, get to a place where a deer can be left alone, get old and have minimal pressure, get to a place with edges, which translate into food, and an area that there's something that concentrates deer at moving. In a swamp, it could be a beaver dam. It could be a pinch point between two ponds. It could be whatever. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be like the topography. That's what I mean. There can be, features. Could be a cliff, a cliff line or whatever. Beaver ponds. There's a bunch of different things that can concentrate and funnel deer movement, but you want to have like a spot that's super dynamic when it comes to that stuff, because then it's going to be easiest to hunt. So those are like the main three I say I really look for. Like I said, for me, it's going to be up high, but in general, you can find this in a few different settings. You can probably also find it in spots that, if you can get permission on some big tracts of posted land or some tough to access stuff that doesn't really have any of that. Shouldn't say that. Not that it doesn't have any of it. Maybe it's not a mountain or a big, huge swamp, or it's maybe not even that big of woods. But if it's a pocket of, a few hundred acres or something like that where there's no pressure, you could kind of achieve the same thing, I guess. So that would be the answer to that, I would say.
What are you looking for hunting bucks early season? Are you looking more for bedding, food, any combination, travel routes, things like that?
Yeah. Well, so in general, all of the above. If you know where they're bedding, where they're traveling, and where they're eating, you're in really good shape. You have a legitimate shot at that buck. But I start at the food source for sure. Because that's where you're going to find them. And those are the areas that are, I think, the easiest to find, is those early season food sources. They're usually cuts, acorns, apples, if you have apples, or hayfield or food plot. But I think those last three are probably the exception rather than the rule. So really, I'm looking for acorns or like a cut. And honestly, the acorns are number one. If you have white oak acorns, those are the best. A lot of areas honestly, all the areas I hunt don't have white oaks. So I'm looking for red oaks. You get into some beaches, but it doesn't seem like that's a preferred source if it's a good mast year, like in early season. So 100% I'm looking for red oak, like stands of red oak that are dropping. You can speed scout those. I guess the best thing I would say is you want to, before the season, like this time of year, maybe not when there's a bunch of snow, but, postseason before you get the snow. You could do it now too. It's just a lot more challenging to cover ground. So say like after the season ends, before there's a bunch of snow, or when that snow melts off, cover ground and look for those stands of oaks and, pin them on your map so you're aware of where they're at. And then in like late August, you can speed scout and, go from oak grove or oak stand to oak stand. Or sometimes it's like a whole mountainside of oak, right? So it's not like it may be 100 acres of oak, but that's okay. You want to be in that 100 acres if, they're producing, and if you're finding sign, then you just have to kind of micro scout and find maybe a hot scrape or a trail or whatever, something that pinches them within those oaks. There's a lot, usually sign right there too. So once you find those oaks, usually when those bucks shed velvet, first, second week of September, right before the season opens, whether you're in New Hampshire, it's the 15th, or you're kind of the rest of the Northeast, September 15th. I think actually Adirondacks is like the last few days in September. Well, whatever. That 2-week period between, say, September 15th and the first few days in October. When those bucks shed velvet prior to that, those few weeks, they leave a ton of sign as far as rubbing goes, because they're rubbing their antlers, and they have this like spike of testosterone, which causes them to shed antlers, but also causes them to rub trees rather aggressively. So like some of the most rubbing sign you will see for the whole season outside of like late October, November is actually like mid-September. And that's not always, it's most of the time coincides with the hot food source. So if you find a stand of oaks or mountainside of oaks or whatever that's dropping, and then you find a bunch of fresh rubs, that's where those bucks are feeding. After that, I'm trying to, I guess, theorize where they're bedding. And I may know from, in general, like a general area, like, oh, they're coming off that mountain, or they're coming off that point. Or maybe they're coming out of a whatever. I mean, there could be, bucks can bed anywhere in the big woods. But they do have preferred areas. If you are familiar enough with the area and you can find the food source and kind of see the direction of travel by following the sign. I mean, rub lines are super prevalent at that time of year. They're leaving rub lines going from bedding to feed. I actually almost killed a buck opening night a few years back. I had scouted this area. This buck had this giant rub line coming off this knob off a mountain, going through this drainage and like feeding on oaks. And I basically followed his rub line from the year before. There was oaks 2 years in a row, and he was back in there doing the same thing. And I had him at like 40 yards opening night. Like I just had him going to the oaks, and I knew the trail he was walking. So, and I knew where he was bedding. He came off that knob, and it was kind of like the textbook setup. But knowing the area and scouting beforehand is a really good thing to do, because you don't have to go and stomp through everything, early season when those deer are there. You can, I would. I mean, if you don't know what the area looks like, go in there and bust them out of there, and then hopefully come back 4 or 5 days later and he should be back in there. If you're continually busting them out of there, that's going to be a different scenario. But one time is not the end of the world. It's probably better not to bust him at all, so he doesn't know that anybody's in there, and then be there, when you need to be with the right wind and the right condition. But yeah, I'm looking for food. That's the number one thing. And usually I'm looking for red oaks, acorns, and then I'm trying to piece together their pattern from that. And like I said, once you get on those oaks, you can find those trees that they prefer. A lot of times there'll be scrapes, and I'll make mock scrapes right in the middle. If I think like this is the kill tree, I'll make a mock scrape, and they will absolutely hit those scrapes super hard in September if you have a scrape there. There may even be scrapes, honestly. I've seen them. I mean, I've seen some pretty damn good scrape activity in September. So yeah. Actually, I killed a buck, that buck over there on a scrape opening night. Like, was that 3 Septembers ago? And then I killed, in South Dakota, but I killed a buck on September 1st, the one next to it, on a scrape. So yeah, I've had a lot of success, or a lot of close encounters in September, but I've killed a lot of bucks as well. So scrapes in a food source, theorize where they're coming from, get the right wind, get a cold front, and you should be at least somewhat in the game, I would say.
That leads us pretty good into another one we've got.
Yeah.
Talking about wind and scent in the big woods, how far do you worry about your scent blowing around when you're thinking about access routes? Like, say there's a bedding area of, it's 300, 400, 500 yards away, and that's in the general downwind direction. How concerned are you if it's that much of a distance?
It just really depends. For sure, deer can smell you from that far away. There's no doubt. I would say, though, more often than not, your scent is not going to go 500 yards in the same direction without being diverted in the mountains or in the big woods. Like, usually there's something like an edge that's going to kick it, or, topography or thermals. I guess to say if you're 500 plus yards, I'm probably not that concerned. Obviously, if I know the deer like in this one pocket, I'm not going to sit there and blow my wind at them. I'm going to try to avoid that situation. But like if I have to go and, walk upwind, if you will, of an area where I think a deer might be, and I'm 500 yards away, I'm probably just going to move quickly through it. I think that's another important thing is I like to try to make, if I can, efficient entry and exit routes. So like, you're minimizing the time you're blowing your wind. So like, the deer catches a tiny molecule of you one time of a human and goes, probably not as big a deal if he's sitting there smelling it for 5 minutes and it's strong, right? So, I try to avoid those areas for sure. I mean, if you can give them 700, 800 yards or a mile, then that's way better. And the chances of him smelling you that far is far less. I mean, that scent is dissipating as it travels. And like I said, it's being diverted. So, you could be like, okay, I have a west wind and those deer are 500 yards east of me. The chances of that west wind going westerly for 500 yards and not taking, being wrapped around a mountain or hitting an edge and, swirling back or whatever are it's pretty good that they're not going to get you. It's not like you're in flat ag country where it's just going to go for miles in the same direction, right? So that's a tough question. It depends a lot on what's going on. As far as it was how far are you concerned about your scent? Was there another part to that?
Yeah, there was a few parts to that question.
We can dive in a little more because it's obviously a pretty important one, I think.
Yeah, they're all a little bit different, but next one is say you're going into a new area, or you have a general idea of where you're going to be at, but you don't know exactly which tree you're going to sit in.
Yep.
How worried are you about ground scent if you're going to go in and do a hang and hunt?
Okay, for a hang and hunt, not that worried. I would prefer. Okay, how do I say this? Scent. I look at scent in two different ways. I look at scent that's going to affect me that day during that hunt, and then I look at scent that's going to affect the general area over time. It's two different things. Ground scent is more likely to affect the area over time. Okay, so the chances of the deer that you're going to shoot that day, and they can cut your boots, but if you pick good trees, especially when you're hanging and hunting okay, I do remember this question. I'll circle back. I think the one question was the guy was asking, he kind of went too far and wanted to go back, and he was worried about that. I wouldn't, you can't get too, one thing is like, try to keep your boots clean. Like that's a big deal. Like try to actually keep your boots clean. Like you can minimize a lot of that. Don't be handling the soles if you can help it with like the oil of your hands. Don't put them in the back of your truck on the ground. Like try to, or the cab of your truck, try to keep them like relatively clean. You can reduce that scent. I'm not saying you can eliminate it, but like, once again, if you're in and out of an area multiple times and you have twice as many scent, you're leaving, like say you go up 4 times and they say there's, I don't know, would you measure scent? I don't know. Like you have 1,000 scent molecules, human scent molecules on your boots, but then you reduce it to 500. So you leave, you know what I'm saying? You're leaving less scent by reducing it and staying clean as you go in and out of an area. The more you go in and out of an area and leave ground scent, and people think ground scent's like from the bottom of your soles. It's more often it's actually the vegetation, branches, whatever they're touching and brushing against the bottom of your pant leg and the sides of your boots. That's where you're leaving more of the scent. That rubber sole doesn't hold scent the same way. If you're wearing rubber boots, then you're in good shape. I hate rubber boots, particularly in the mountains. So I don't. I wear like leather boots and, pants. But you brushing up against stuff is leaving more scent than actually like on the leaves or on the ground, on the dirt from the soles. So keep that in mind. That's why a lot of times when I'm going through the woods, I'm trying to actively avoid like branches and whatever. You'll see me like weaving in and out like I'm crazy, but I do, because I do think it makes it a big deal. But if you're going in and you're going to have like one hunt a week, or you've never been in there and you're doing a hanging hunt, I wouldn't worry too much about my ground scent. I would just try to hopefully set up so that if you can get a shot at that deer before he hits your boot tracks. If he hits your boot tracks and they're like 20 minutes old, he's probably going to wig out. If he hits your boot tracks and they're 5 hours old, he's going to notice, but he may not jump out of his skin. So, if at all possible, prevent walking where you expect that deer to come from, obviously. But it's not like the end of the world. But if you're going to continue to hunt that spot, try to minimize your ground scent in and out. So that ground scent isn't going to screw you on that hunt that you're on today, but it's going to screw you down the road. Whereas like the wind direction is far more important when you're actually in the tree. The ground scent's more important for like longevity of a spot, keeping it fresh and keeping the deer moving naturally.
What about for, say you have a spot that is a hub where 3 or 4 trails all kind of come to an X.
Yep.
And it just makes this giant spider web going all different directions. How do you go about hunting that spot? Because you're obviously gonna cross
deer
trails.
Deer
could come from any direction.
Yeah.
There's no real perfect wind because you're vulnerable from any of those positions.
So that doesn't actually happen that much, honestly.
That type of situation.
No, it doesn't, because Usually in the spots that I'm hunting, something is funneling their movement. So by definition, there is areas where they are not coming from and they're being pushed around, like a beaver pond or a really steep drop off or a hard edge of a cut or whatever, that the deer are going around. So not coming through there, they're going around it. So you use that to your advantage and blow your wind into that dead zone, off that cliff, that steep, mountainside, into a really thick cut that the deer just don't want to go through because it's like this, over water, whatever, down a drainage. So there can definitely be like a concentration, but usually it's concentrated there because there's something that pushes them there, and because that something is there, that something is not where the deer want to go. So you can blow your wind into that. So it's not very often you have like this hub of everything coming together in a big like flat plain where they can come from everywhere, right? That's kind of like counterintuitive. That's not how that works, because when you're in a big flat plain where they can come from everywhere, they can go everywhere too, and you're not going to get that concentration of where all these trails are coming together. Usually you'll have trails like, coming from the north and the south and maybe one other direction, or they're crisscrossing like this. But if you're coming in and you're blowing your wind that way and all the trails are going north to south and you're blowing east or west, well, you're in good shape. So most of the time you're not like, oh man, there's no place with a safe wind when I have this awesome spot. There usually is like one or two directions where you can blow your wind.
Yeah. The only situation I'm thinking that might be possible with all trails coming together like that is just if you have some topography, if there's like a bunch of fingers coming down,
like in a bottom, like a thermal hub. Yeah, and those are tough to hunt though.
Right.
Like I try to avoid those areas.
Yeah,
so that's
the wind's never going to do a consistent thing.
No,
anyway.
Like the best thing you can hope for is like a thermal pull that's going to pull you down the drainage in a direction, and you're probably going to give up one trail. And I'm not too concerned about giving up one trail. If there's 4 directions they can come from, and I'm giving up one of them, that's not the end of the world. I mean, I try to avoid it, but it's not the end of the world. I wouldn't not hunt it because of that.
In big woods hunting with low deer density.
Yep.
How do you maintain confidence in a spot when you might go 4, 5, 6, 7 days without seeing a deer, or seeing a buck, or not seeing a deer at all?
So for me, it's because I've done my homework and I'm confident in the spot. And I'm confident in the spot because most of the time I have historical data that tells me the buck or the class of buck or multiple bucks that I want to kill are in that area during that time frame. Okay. I also confirm that deer, or like I said, that class of buck, whatever you're after, is there that year. So just because he was there last year, or those couple bucks were doing something last year, doesn't mean they're going to do it this year. But if you have them doing it last year and then they're in the area again this year, well, you have something to go on now. You have historical data and real-time data. I don't think it gets much better than that, honestly. If you have both of those data points, like you have historical data of a deer doing something, during a particular date range, and then it seems like it's trending. He's there, but you got pictures of him. You saw him, probably pictures in the big woods, because, we see these deer like almost never. Hence the question. Mm-hmm. You just have to believe in your plan, and then you just have to have a good spot that's going to concentrate those deer, and you have good entry and exit to know you're not blowing that deer out of there before you ever get the opportunity to see him, right? So that's how I have the confidence, because I believe in the spot, and I've done my homework, and I have the data to support that I need to be there. Does that mean you're going to see that deer 100% of the time? Absolutely not. I say it's probably a coin flip. If you've done everything, it's probably a coin flip whether you're going to see that deer. That's the reality of it. But I mean, honestly, in the big woods on a mature deer, I'll take a freaking coin flip. That's a 50% chance you're going to see him. So people love to see deer. I love to see deer too. But I mean, I've had literally, I think when I killed that deer up there, and where those sheds, I put them over there. But anyway, that set of sheds right there, 150-inch deer, and that deer, which is a 140-inch deer, both the deer were 6+. I sat and I killed that deer on day 6 or 7. I saw him 2 days in a row, and then I saw that 150-inch 6-year-old right after I shot him, after I'd sat there for 5 days and seen maybe one deer. and I had like the best action-packed day, day and a half I'd ever had in the big woods. So there can be absolutely nothing for 5 days, and then the biggest deer your life could walk through. So like, just because you're not seeing deer in the big woods, it doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't. I mean, it's nice to see them. It's encouraging and reassuring and gives you the confidence, but it really just doesn't mean anything. Yeah, if you have the data.
There's so much that you don't see. I mean.
That too, yeah.
A couple of days, like in October, we went and sat up right near where you killed your buck tracking. Sat up on that scrape, and conditions were great both nights.
Yeah, we didn't see anything.
nice steady wind. Felt like it was going to be a kill night. Didn't see anything. And then in New Hampshire, obviously you can't look at your cameras.
Same calendar day.
Calendar day. So after dark, when all the pictures come through, and there's one of the bucks we're hunting coming
just down the mountain.
He had probably bedded right around the same spot where you were at. Walked right down that edge to where the camera was. And
so you don't.
We were within a couple hundred yards from him, and you wouldn't know if there was a deer within a mile of you.
And if we didn't have cameras on the scrape we sat, we wouldn't even know that. We sat there. Did we sit there at least 2 nights on really good weather? Yeah. We didn't see anything, but like that was like the hottest scrape that I knew of the whole season was that period right there. So you could be, that's the thing, I guess, is to summarize this. You could be in the best spot to kill a giant deer in New Hampshire and not see a deer for 4 straight days, but you're still in the best spot. So you have to have confidence, and it takes time in these spots. It just does. The frequency of these deer in low deer density areas that they visit any particular spot is just low. That's just low frequency. And maybe once a week, and maybe once every 5 days, maybe once every 10 days or 2 weeks. So the longer you have and you can stick it out, and like I said, you can't be stupid about it. If like something dramatic has changed, like from one year to another or from October to November, don't ignore it. But I'm saying if there's nothing major, you have this deer in this area doing something the year before, and then he's there again this year, and all the conditions look very similar, believe in it, because that's about as much as you can go on, I would say. That's like as good as it's going to get. You can't ask for any more.
I feel like once it works for you once, then you just have that in the back of your head that
for sure, it's confidence. If
it worked once, it can work again.
Well, and it can.
But
it's just. I get the doubt because I have it sometimes. I'll be sitting there on day 5 and I start doubting it, and then I just got to keep reminding myself what's going. I'm like, I've been here before, though. I know better than to move or doubt my plan. And like I said, sometimes you sit there for a freaking week straight and you don't see them. It's the reality of it. That could happen.
Yeah, just got to eat it.
Yep.
This one kind of relates to what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Or relates heavily to what we were just talking about. How much weight do you put on historical daylight of scrape activity? We kind of already hit on it a little bit, but
a lot. Yeah, I mean, that's just, you're right. Piggyback, what is it? A lot. Scrape activity for sure. Now, I will say this. Scrapes go hot and cold from year to year sometimes. So you could have a super hot scrape the year before, and then like it's just cold the next year. Not that it won't get hit. It's just not getting hit in the same way. Something has changed. I think it's usually a herd dynamic that changes. So if you're monitoring those scrapes with trail cameras and you look at the trend the year before when that scrape was hot, and you look at that historical data, and this year does not match that or mirror it, well, maybe that's not the scrape to be on this year. There may be a scrape 100 yards away that's just as hot as that one last year. So, if the deer was on this scrape, maybe 200 yards, maybe 400 yards, whatever. It doesn't like it. I would look at more the area that deer was in, not the particular scrape. The particular scrape can be very, useful if it's hot again, but don't like get caught like, oh, he's just not hitting that scrape anymore. Well, is he in the area? Yeah, he is. Well, there's probably another scrape. Maybe there's one. Maybe the licking branch got knocked off the tree, or maybe whatever. There's a million things that could happen, but I wouldn't like write off the whole area just because that particular scrape is a little bit colder or not as active. There may be, and let me try to. I know I had an example of that. Yes, I did. Okay, so scrape I killed that deer on right there, that big giant 8-pointer, was hot for years and years and years, and then it's like been just kind of like dying off the last few years. Well, last year, I was like, something has changed. They're not like, this is just a focal point. It's one of those spots. It's a saddle that concentrates activity. I know they're using it. I know there's multiple mature bucks in the area, but I'm not getting the pictures on this one scrape anymore. So that last winter, I scouted and I found like 2 huge hub scrapes about 150 yards from that scrape. And that scrape was like one of the hottest scrapes I had the whole season. I hunted it actually during rut week because that's the spot I hunted. So that's just an example that like
those branch get broke off or something weird like that, or just some other.
No,
other
I wish I could tell you what the reason is, but no, I don't know. It was 100 yards away, pretty much in that same terrain feature, more or less, right? So in that same concentration, it's just the hot spot has just shifted over the years. So, don't ignore that because it can shift and change. But in general, like you can translate the data from that scrape. Okay, well, it's probably just going down, but it's 100 yards away this year. So like look at those dates and be like, okay, late October, that scrape was hot this year. This one's trending to be the hot spot this year. So I want to be on this one late October instead of the one that was hot last year. So, it's not like, this isn't like a perfect science. You have to like think about it a little bit, and you have to do a little bit of legwork, right? Your historical data only goes so far. You need that like real-time current year data to couple with it. I think that's like the 1-2 punch that really is super effective if you can use historical data and then data from current year.
Yeah, and you'll probably think Brett's crazy for this, but he actually broke off the stick over the scrape that he shot his deer at last fall with a bow because he found a better one.
Well, that's another example.
100 yards away.
It's another example. That scrape is trending to be better, and I don't want them going to the other one. So that branch is dead anyways. So I just snapped it off. So they'll go to that one more often, and the chances are better now that if I'm sitting in a tree over the new scrape that they'll go there and not to the old one.
Yeah.
So yeah,
took a little pause before you did it. You're like,
yeah, kind of like kind of doesn't feel right, but
yeah,
I think it's the move.
Yeah. All right, so switching gears a little bit.
Yeah.
What type of impact do you see predators having on fawns in New England?
Predators on fawns. Well, I think they for sure have an impact. Coyotes eat fawns, bobcats eat fawns, black bears eat fawns.
You see it getting worse or staying
No,
the same?
I don't think so. I don't think it's any, and I actually don't think it's a big impact large scale in the overall herd. They definitely kill fawns. I'm not saying that. But I don't think that like our deer population is low because predators are killing fawns. I think that we have a carrying capacity that's limited by our soils, in our climate, in our those two things more than anything. And we're at it or below it, just below it, which is where you want to be. You don't want to be over it. And so it's not like those predators are keeping it far below the carrying capacity. They're not limiting the deer herd. Other factors are limiting it. And it's mostly, like I said, the winters, the soils, the food, that type of stuff. In general, we have poor soils here. We have poor food sources, and we have tough winters. So when you have all those things, you just have low deer densities. It's not really a function of the predator impact on fawns. It's more of just the environment that we're in. So do they kill fawns? Absolutely yes. Do I think that it's a like growing or big problem that's like limiting our deer herd? Not at all.
Yeah, I actually wasn't sure. Obviously, you just have anecdotal stuff from your own time in the woods. So I did a little research. I couldn't find any good recent studies that talked about fawn survival rates or anything like that in any recent time. But I have looked at the harvest reports from the last the last handful of years, and I don't know what the number of hunters in New Hampshire has been over the last say 20 years to now.
Yeah.
But I do know that the kill numbers have been generally trending upwards over the last 20 to 40 years. For example, 40 years ago, are specifically the buck kill numbers. The number of bucks killed this year was double of what it was 40 years ago. I'm sure population and of hunters has something to do with that, but
it does. But the other thing, it's just
and of those deer that were shot, the 5-year average over the last 5 years, 40% have been 1.5-year-old deer, which tells me that there are a lot of deer that are living also. There's a lot that goes into that. I don't think predators are a huge problem for deer in the Northeast.
If we had wolves, that might be a different story. If we had big cats, although I don't think, they're pretty effective predators.
We're going to have a guest on next week that lives out in Minnesota, and I was talking on the phone with him the other day.
He's in wolf country?
Yeah. He said that.
I'm sure he has a different take on it, believe me.
Yes. Yeah. So we'll definitely talk about that more. But
I don't think predators are, they affect the deer for sure, but I don't think they're like limiting our herd or like decimating it by any means. I just don't think they are. The herd is more than anything dictated by food sources and the winters. We're only going to kill so many deer in the Northeast for the most part because it's so darn hard to see them and kill them. We can't effectively kill that many deer because of the terrain that they live in and the dense forests that they're in and like the relatively low hunter density. I mean, there's some higher hunter densities. I understand that, as you get in southern New England and along the coastal areas. But for the most part, if you get away,
we're like 19th lowest, so we're on the lower side actually for hunter density, which is
right. So I just, it's mostly like, hey, if we had 5 hard winters and if we had no mass crop and hey, has the logging decreased? So like all that stuff that was cut, is it now getting out of that early succession where it's really good a food source to the mid succession, we're losing food? Those are the things that impact deer more than predators and like hunters, like hunter numbers. It's those things in these areas. In other parts of the country, or the whitetail world, it can be different. But in the Northeast, I think those are the biggest things that are, driving the population.
Over the last 5 years, the average over 3.5 was 30%. Also,
it's not terrible.
No, which I was actually kind of surprised.
I thought it was almost.
Because I know on a previous episode,
60%.
I think it was the first episode with John we talked about. Yeah, we were guessing that it was like 60%.
I thought I had seen that. I actually thought I had seen that number somewhere. Though.
Yeah, maybe,
but maybe not.
Maybe in one unit or something.
So the QDMA puts out. We should look at that. The QDMA puts out a annual whitetail report, and it reports. For the states that keep the data and have it, it reports the percentage of 1.5-year-old kill. We could probably find it here. We won't do it right now and keep everybody waiting. But I think it was higher. Maybe it's 40 now. I think it has been as high as like 50 or 60% though. But we even with that, most of the Northeast has a pretty good age structure. I would say we have some of the South, like Mississippi, does a great job of managing for older deer, but we don't do a ton of like intensive management like them. For how little we actually do, we have a really good age structure, and that's why you hear of 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old deer being killed in New England all the time. Where like some parts of the country. For deer to get to 6 is kind of like rare. So, and that's not rare here. It just isn't. It happens like all the time.
Yeah, you just got to find them. What state would you pick to do a DIY hunt on public land?
For whitetails?
Yes.
There's a lot of options. The number one thing I would say is, when are you talking?
Let's say
is it like early season, October, rut, late season? And then also what weapon? That's another big one. Mm-hmm. But I guess for probably the majority of people, they're probably thinking about like a bow hunt during the rut. Would you say? No?
Let's just do all three. Say early season.
Okay. So early season I'm looking for sure for a state that the deer are extremely visible. Because I need to be able to see a lot of country and find deer, because I'm not going to have a ton of time to scout, boots on the ground, and run trail cameras. So I want a visual area. So that is going to make me gravitate towards the western, Great Plains and west. There's a lot of great options out there. To rattle off a few, both the Dakotas, Nebraska, Montana, Wyoming. Yeah, those are kind of some of the ones I would probably focus in on. Low people density out there, low bow hunter density for the most part. That is a part of the country where you can, Eastern Colorado would be a good option as well. That's a part of the country you could potentially get onto some pretty good private just by knocking and talking to a rancher. We've done that in the past. Also, the public land's going to have for the most part, little pressure early in the season. If I'm looking for those states, I want to, once again, just like in New Hampshire, I want to identify the name of the game early season, anywhere you are, is finding the preferred food source for the time frame you're going to be there. I think that the three main food sources that you're going to find early season in that like Great Plains and Western landscape is going to be green beans, alfalfa, and acorns. Those are the three things I'm going to key in on. That's pretty much it. Like, that's what I look for. I'm looking for areas that have that I can access, that I can see long ways. If I can get up on like a bluff or whatever, a spine, and see like a whole bottom and watch, 300 acres of alfalfa, or I can cruise around and check out several different bean fields, I'm going to do that. If there's a oak drainage, there's a bunch of oaks, that a lot of that stuff is super savanna-y out there. So like, it's not like dense, like you'll have oak and then 30 yards another oak, or like it's open out there. So you can see down into it pretty well. It's not like you're looking through like a, spruce patch like in the Northeast. So if you can get down and look into some of that stuff and glass up some of these deer. And the other thing I'll say is, out in those landscapes, the deer move a long way in daylight to get to food. So they may move a mile to get to a food source from their bed in the evening. So there's a lot of opportunity to observe them traveling, and then also on the food source. So if you can get an area that's like a pinch point where there's like 500 acres or 1,000 acres of food or agriculture up here, and there's maybe like a big swale or swamp or whatever here, and there's like something that pinches them. Well, get there and watch that and see what's coming through. I mean, that'll help you determine what's there. But I would say spending time behind the glass and identifying those hot food sources for the area is key. And I would pick one of those states that you can get a tag in, where you can find a lot of public land, or if you're getting in areas of public land, there's a lot of like private ranches that just don't have anybody whitetail bow hunting in like September, right? So you can go ask. So that's what I would do. And I've done that in the past for sure. I've been successful in South Dakota and Montana doing that. Let's see, what other states? Those are the main ones I've hunted, but like I've been in North Dakota and Nebraska, and like it's a lot of the same stuff there. Wyoming, Colorado, it's the same deal. It's big open expanses and like essentially green food sources or oaks, if there are oaks. And just identifying them and spending time covering ground and glassing. That's the big thing. Like I said, pick a state, pick the landscape you want to hunt. I mean, there's lots of options there. You can hunt like a bunch of breaks and coulee type stuff. You can hunt big plains. You can hunt mountains that dump into a river bottom. There's a lot of options there, but in general, it's the same concept. Find the preferred food source. Find a place where you can get a tag in early September, and cover a lot of ground in glass. And you're going to turn up something. Like, it's not that hard to find those deer in that country. Getting an arrow in them or getting permission or get whatever, that's the different story, but that's the hard part. But it's not hard to find them. It really isn't. So I guess that's early September. I mean, if we go into I guess we can jump to the rut.
Yeah.
Man, it just depends what kind of hunt you want. Like, okay, let me think. If I'm going to do a do-it-yourself hunt, man, that's a tough question. I have so many places I want to go. I think there's a lot of options during the rut. I think that's probably what it comes down to.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of a big wood state at all. I'm not afraid. I'm going to look for...
What do you have for a bucket list right now?
Idaho, Washington, like Pacific Northwest whitetail, for sure.
That's cool.
Ontario, or I won't even say Ontario. I'll say northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan, southern Ontario area. That general area around the Great Lakes, like the upper Midwest. There's some big woods up there and some great deer. I would love to do that. For me, also like PA, West Virginia mountains. PA, West Virginia, like Eastern Kentucky, potentially somewhere in that it's not southern, like mid Appalachia range that I haven't really got to hunt whitetails, but I'm hunting turkeys and I love it. That would be a good one. I mean, there's so many. There really is. I mean, really, it's like, what experience do you want to have? Do you want to have big woods mountain hunt? Do you want to have like a plains hunt? Do you want to have there's so many options.
You want to see a lot of deer? You're okay with
that? Yeah. Are you looking for a 180? Or you'd be happy with a solid 125? It just really depends. I mean, I would say in general though, those like Great Plains and Western states are just overlooked for deer because they're like so far, like they're just hard to get to. But like those deer are super visible. They're easy to figure out. Oftentimes they're running these long lines like a river bottom or like a tree line or a ditch. And they're not that hard to like figure out where to encounter them. Like it's like, well, yeah, they're kind of run along that drainage because it's like nothing, no cover outside the drainage, right? So
yeah,
if you can, I know it's kind of like, if you're an eastern whitetail hunter to go out west to hunt whitetails, you're like, well, if I want to go out there, maybe I want to hunt like elk or mule deer or whatever. Well, that's fine too. But I mean, I don't know. I think that's a great option in general. I would say, so I guess to answer the question, for someone that like wants to go out and have a good hunt, probably going to see a good deer, encounter a good deer, and not like have an extremely like challenging hunt that's difficult to figure out, I would say pick one of those Western states. Like those, like I said, the Dakotas to Montana, more or less, like, and then maybe even Wyoming, Colorado, whatever, somewhere in there. That would be what I would say. Most of those states too, you can get tags relatively easy. If you're talking like Kansas, you can't get a tag. Iowa, Western Iowa is like similar to, those Dakotas, but tougher to get a tag. So most of the Dakotas you can get a tag. I think North Dakota is over the counter. South Dakota isn't over the counter, but you're almost guaranteed as long as you apply ahead of time. Montana is getting a little tougher. I haven't hunted Montana for whitetails in a bit. I do think you have to put in, so maybe Montana is not the best option at this time. Nebraska, I'm pretty sure, is over the counter. And I'm not sure about Wyoming. Colorado, I think, is pretty easy to draw. Actually, yeah, I think you hunt Colorado at whitetails every year. So anyway, that's what I would suggest. And just because I think it's the easiest to plan, it's the easiest to figure out. You're going to see deer, and like the setups are not that challenging. And there's some huge deer out there that people just don't realize. So that's what I'd say. Now, I've kind of done that. I don't know if that's necessarily what my choice would be. I may do something that's a little more challenging that maybe I wouldn't recommend to someone else trying to do a do-it-yourself whitetail for the first year. So, but I mean, it's all just what you want. What do you want out of the hunt?
All right, so we'll wrap up with this last one. Talk about some of the highs and lows of traveling to hunt, like planning trips, unsuccessful trips, being away from home, all of that.
Yeah. You're going to have lows on a lot of trips, no matter what you do. If you do your homework and you prepare properly, you scout properly, you network properly, you have a plan going in, you can really reduce those lows. If you walk into an area and you just don't know what to expect, you didn't research the area, you didn't talk to anybody out there, you don't have the gear that you need, you don't have the clothing, you're just unprepared, you're going to start off like flat on your face. So what I think got pretty good at is when I travel, I have prepared for it for a long time, and I know exactly what I'm getting into. One of the things that I think people fail to do is use all the resources available to them to gain knowledge about the area they want to hunt. One of the big things is, like, this is a kind of a good example, that the South Dakota buck I killed, I just happened to get permission from, it was actually Chris, what was it? We know Chad now well, but at the time we didn't know him. And he has a ranch in South Dakota that we have permission to hunt. But I think it was like Chris's friend's dad.
Just some weird,
and it was like, hey, so-and-so's got some. And it was like, do you think that type of thing. And, we did have a little bit of an in there, but like it was pretty well removed. But they were super friendly, and, they said, yeah, sure. And like what we ended up finding out is like no one really bow hunts there. Actually, Chris didn't even kill his big deer on that Chad's farm. He got permission from another rancher.
Oh, really?
Yeah, close by. So like that is an obtainable thing if you pick a good area. But one thing I did do is I was like, I don't know. You don't know what to expect as far as like the deer numbers, the quality of deer, what the behavior's like. I actually tracked down a Whitetail Properties real estate agent in the county that I was going to hunt, and I called him. I cold called him like, hey, dude. I was like, what's going on, man? And he's like, oh, and I'm like, hey, I got permission to hunt this. I know this is a long shot, but I know you're from this area. I got permission to hunt this ranch. I was like, in general, what can I expect in this area? Like what for like deer? Like what is my goal? I got a week. It's early season. Like what's realistic? And I was like, I understand that every ranch isn't the same, but in general, like in that area. And he said, you should be able to get on a 150, 160 inch deer if you put your time in. And I said, okay. And that's exactly what happened. I got on and killed 150 inch deer. And I knew like I wasn't looking for a 170 or 180, but I knew that, hey, I can probably do better than a 125 or 130, like keep looking type of thing. So, that set my expectation now my expectation's here. So
that's great information to have.
Yeah. And I went in, that's good. That's a good scenario, right? When you're probably going to be able to find a 150 plus, that's a good area. But I didn't go in there, say if I didn't call him and say his answer would have been, you should kill. So another example, I talked to when I was in Montana, I stopped into a fly fishing shop because I was fly fishing, but I was also bow hunting September whitetails. And I talked to the owner, who I know is a big bow hunter because I've seen him on social media. And I asked him the same question. He said, I would shoot the first 130 inch deer you see.
Oh, shit.
That's what he said. Like I wouldn't. And I said, okay, well, there's my expectation now.
Yeah.
So now I know I'm not going to wait or look or search for 160. If I find a 125 or 130, I'm going to be like, hell yeah, that's what we're going after. And I ended up killing that velvet deer right there, which is not a 130. But it was like, I knew and I'm like, okay, that's a decent buck for the area. However, if I had went out to that area in Montana expecting to find a 160 and all I'm finding is 125s, well, I've set my expectation here that's not realistic, and now I'm now I'm in a low trying to dig out of a hole where like, hey, dude, that's not realistic. That's not going to happen. Maybe it will, but the chances are it's not going to happen. I went back to that same area and I spent a week, and I knew that it was a long shot, so I was okay with it. But I spent a week looking for a deer bigger than 130, and it took me like a week to find one. And I had him for like 2 or 3 nights. Saw him once, but like just didn't kill him. But like that's what you have to. That's very important. The other thing is people do not rely on like the state biologists enough. Those people will tell you anything that you want to know. You just got to call them. Like it's the weirdest thing that like, and I know that some state biologists maybe should be in the woods a little more than they are. But in general, they have a really good idea of what's around, what the deer populations are like, what kind of habitat they're in. Call them and pick their brain. To talk to the biologist if there you want to hunt. Like that's their job to know that. And also they're a public servant for the most part, right? So you can go and talk to them and they're going to give you information. I mean, maybe they're not going to tell you like the honey hole that maybe they hunt, but they're going to give you pretty good information. And you don't need like super specific stuff, but if you're talking generalities, you can figure out a lot of stuff. So I think to start out, I will say to give yourself an advantage is do your homework and set your expectations and have a plan. That's the biggest thing. Most of the hunts that I've been on that like were disasters is because we had a shitty plan. Like it wasn't well thought out. Our expectations weren't right. We didn't nail everything down, and it shows. And that's why I'm pretty particular about when I travel. Like I really like to control and like I like to plan things because I want to control. You can't control much when you're out there, like, right? You can't. So you want to control everything that you can up until the point, and then it's going to be what it's going to be once you get there. But I would say that because really, if you're like completely like blindsided or like caught off guard by what you find or what happens on a trip, it's probably because you didn't prepare well enough and your expectations were not where they needed to be. So I will say that is such a big part of having a successful trip in traveling is that part of it. Now, you can do all that right and you can still have a tough trip. And that's the whole other half of it. But at the end of the day, like I always say, and I've had a lot of successful trips, but I've had a lot of trips where I didn't fill tags and things went wrong. I always say that, hey, if I had a good plan and when I got out there and I realized, hey, no, this is a solid plan. Like we're finding what we expected, and you execute your plan, but there's just factors that you can't control, that things don't go your way. That's part of it. Just be happy that you had a good plan and you executed it. The result is the result. You can't really control the result. Control your process, control your preparation, and then eventually, if you keep stacking up those trips, you're going to have success. And it just takes time. And I can tell you, the more you do it and the more you get, reps with these trips and, have these experiences, you're going to be more and more successful. So don't get down. I mean, you can't be tied to like bringing home that rack, on a trip. Like you want to, and that's the goal, but like it doesn't necessarily mean you're unsuccessful in your trip if you don't bring home a deer. I think the success is being prepared, having a good plan, executing the plan, and hey, maybe the weather was terrible, deer didn't move, whatever. Or maybe the deer, like for example, that one deer I told you about in Montana that I found, finally was like a 140-inch deer, and I looked for like a whole week, finally found him on a ranch. It was like the whole thing. It took a week of driving around, glassing, talking to this guy, going to talk to this land, like this whole thing. And he was coming out of this bottom, going up this drainage up to a big plateau of alfalfa. And we had a ground blind right at the top of the drainage because there's no trees where he was coming up out. And we pulled in, and this is a big 500-acre alfalfa field, huge, like pivot, right? So you can see forever. We're like driving up because we got permission from the rancher. So we're driving up to get in this blind. We were going to dump everything in the blind because you can drive along the edge of the field and then just drive back and then walk back up in. All our gear, we were filming, so we had a bunch of camera gear. We were literally driving up, looking at the blind, looking at the drainage, the alfalfa's here, and that buck walks out at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a 90-degree day, and just standing in front of the blind and looks at us and then just runs back down to the bottom. And I'm like, oh my God. So we didn't see him again. We saw him one more night, but further down. But if we had been in that blind 30 minutes earlier, but who would expect a deer in September to go? I mean, it's not like he's close to his bedding. He's several hundred yards away across open, prairie on a food source, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 90 degrees. I mean, you can't control that. You can't. So in my mind, that helps a success. It's just like that. You can't control that type of thing happening, right? That's a low. We continued to hunt him. We didn't kill him, but hey, we had a good plan. It could have happened. It's not like we never found the deer we were after, and it's not like we weren't in the game when we were. We found them. We were right there. We had them figured out. If we had been in the blind at noon, we probably would have killed them. So you can't be so tied to the result that it ruins a trip, I guess, is the big thing. I think part of travel, the biggest part of traveling is is the planning and the preparation and then the experience when you're there. It's awesome to kill deer, obviously, but it doesn't always happen. You just got to stick with it, though. Like I said, they're not all going to be successful. But the more you do and the more you prepare, the more success you're going to end up having. So the biggest thing, I think people are just afraid to try it and start it. You just got to go do your research, be diligent about it. Use every resource you have available to you. And that's going to get you a lot of the way there, knowing what to expect. I mean, look on, your maps, look at 3D views, go on YouTube and Google the towns. People will have videos. So what the landscape looks like, what to expect. there's so many things you can do to almost put yourself there without being there, so that when you get there, you're not is this Mars? What? I don't know what to do. It's okay, yep, that's exactly what I expected. Okay, here's a great, bottom with, good browse that with green growth that these deer are going to be on. I know it was a drought year because I talked to the biologist and they said it hasn't rained in 2 months. So all the deer are concentrating on every irrigated field there is. Well, now I know I'm looking for irrigated fields and I'm going to concentrate on that, right? So I find one, okay, yep, here's the irrigated field. It's green. Nothing else is green. And there are the deer, where it's you show up there, you don't know that. And you're like, man, what do the deer eat? It's just it's just so dry out here. It's well, yeah, they're in a drought. Oh, they are? Well, yeah, do your homework. You should know that. These are the things that, or maybe you go out there and there was a horrible EHD breakout, or, a horrible winter the year before, and the population is 10% of what it usually is. Well, figure that out and don't go to that area expecting, right? So like, but I'm telling you, that's the biggest part of it is the preparation and doing your homework so that you're in an area where you have a really high chance of being successful and you have a good plan, and you have the gear and you're in the mindset and you're, expecting and anticipating the situation. That's what I would say. It's the same thing with turkeys. Same thing with turkeys. Same thing with anything, really. The more legwork and research and the deeper you dive, the better off you're going to be. And like I said, if you do all that and you're out there and it just doesn't go your way, and you're going to have a low, but that's part of it. At least you did everything in your power and you had a good plan. It just, the luck was not on your side. I'm fine with that. I really am. That's like kind of all you can take away from it, I think.
I agree. I think that's a good spot to wrap this one up. Again, we appreciate all the questions you guys gave us. Like I said, if this brought up more questions for you, if you have something else you want to see answered on a future Q&A, drop us a comment, send us over an email at justhuntpod@gmail.com.
Hopefully you guys, these are good questions, honestly. We get, collectively we get a lot of questions, so this is a great place to answer them. But once again, make sure you're sending them to the email, our social media, or commenting on these videos, because we're not going to see them potentially if you're sending them to like my particular social media. I try to I check them for sure and I use them, but I'm not using them as frequently as like these ones are checked, or, some of the other guys or whatever. So do your best to do that, get them to us. And, maybe don't be afraid to ask specific questions for your situation, because I think people can take away that. So general questions are great, but if the more details you give us about your situation, the better answer we can give you, because the details really matter. There's no one like size fits all for these situations. Every situation is different. It has to be looked at differently. So the more detail you can give us, the better answer we can give you that's, actually applicable to your situation and actually can maybe make a difference in your hunt. So keep them coming. Hopefully you like this one. I guess we're talking food plots in Minnesota Northwoods next week. That'll be a cool one. But until that one, thanks for watching, and we'll see you and listening, and we'll see you on the next one.